Hello and welcome, everybody. Welcome to the No Name Music Cast. My name's Tim, and this is
Joy.
And this week, it is my turn to pick the topic. However, I'm not going to reveal it just yet, because as we've been doing a lot of these episodes, we have a tip of the day, a top tip for you. And I think Joy has got a good top tip this week. At least I hope.
My tip is that if you pick up a new instrument, say maybe a ukulele, and you learn a song, make sure the person playing it isn't left-handed. Learned that the hard way. Was playing my ukulele, tuned it completely backwards, as Tim found out today. So just a word of advice. Also, mirroring is a thing when you're watching videos, learning music. So keep that in perspective too. But yes, if you are right-handed and you plan on playing your ukulele the correct way, the right-handed way, not that left hand's wrong, but correct for me, make sure the first person you follow on the internet isn't left-handed.
Yeah, because Joy showed me her new ukulele today, and she was very excited. And I saw her hold it, and I thought, that doesn't look right to me. I don't think Joy's left-handed. And then I got it, and then it's like the tuning is all back to front. And I was about to follow the Ian Husband's playbook of how to play ukulele, and then I tried to retune it, and then the strings are far too new and they wouldn't hold their tuning. And I was like, what a lovely ukulele, Joy. And I played Thunderstruck on it and handed it back to her.
And to be fair, I've already decided that I'm going to buy non-nylon strings. That's Tip's first words of advice to me.
Well, the only thing I would say about that is be careful what strings you do put on it, because if you put steel strings on it, it's likely it may just fold up on itself because it'd be too much string tension.
I'm going to go do some official Googling of the ukulele strings and see what the world recommends.
Yeah, because like classical strings are not that different from ukulele strings, and they have a lot less tension, but they take a long time to stretch and hold pitch.
Makes sense. Well, anyway, that's my piece of advice, you guys. Make sure your first song isn't they're not left-handed if you're not left-handed. That's all I can say.
There we are. Well, I tell you what, I have a tip for you. Actually, I have two tips. I'm spoiling our listeners tonight with two tips.
Oh, okay.
The first tip, if you buy a Chia Pet, if you see one in a petrol station, gas station, or you see one in a shop and it's got something like that you would like a Bob Ross or some kind of character Chia Pet, where you put the chia seeds on their head and it grows like hair, don't do that. Just don't get involved in that. Like if you want to get one that's like it looks like a sheep or looks like a house that grows chia things, that's fine. But don't get one that's a person. And let me explain why. Because you start doing it and it looks like all cool and you put the chia seeds in their head and it starts to grow. But what happens as it grows, the roots from the chia seeds sort of go down their head. And then after a while, what happens is you get all this chia gunk and it looks like your favorite celebrity died on your kitchen table and that their head is sprouting foliage.
Wonderful. I saw a picture of this today and it was very creepy. It didn't sit well with me.
By the time this episode's posts, I will have put the pictures up on Instagram. And if you follow me on Instagram, you will have seen them. And they are utterly disturbing. And then the worst thing is, so I had this thing on the kitchen table and I just couldn't bear looking at it anymore because it's a David Hasselhoff Chia Pet and it looks like dead David Hasselhoff with foliage growing out of his dead head. And I was like, I don't want this anymore. So I put it out in our little backyard, our little back garden, because I figured at some point all the chia stuff's going to fall off it or rot or something. And then I'll decide what I'm going to do with the chia pottery
remains.
Thing. The remains. So this morning, Hannah sends me a message and she says, this has got even worse than I could ever think of. And she sends me this picture and what happened in the night, some kind of creature took a big chunk out of the chia foliage and ate some of it. So you've now got David Hasselhoff, like with this dead stuff growing out of his chia head, and it now has a big bit missing where some kind of creature, maybe a skunk or a raccoon or a possum or neighborhood cat, I don't know what did it, but there's a big bit missing, and this is getting more weird and disturbing than I ever thought when I saw it in Walmart. And I thought, oh, David Hasselhoff Chia Pet, that'd be fun to do.
No, never again. I mean, even so, have you ever heard of like trypophobia, Tim? Do you know what that is?
Is that the one with the holes?
Mm-hmm. So I have trypophobia. So that alone, thinking of the idea of putting like the seeds in the head and like the way it grows out already kind of bothers me. Mm-hmm. For a Chia Pet, like that concept is already creepy. But then when Tim showed me the Hasselhoff one today, it was even worse because of where it has overgrown. Like you could see where the holes were on the head. No, never. I'm out.
Yeah, it's rough. I mean, I don't know tomorrow how this is going to pan out. Whether I'm going to go out and the whatever creature will have finished it off. It's. I'm glad. In some ways, I'm glad I did it. In other ways, I utterly regret ever getting involved in it.
I feel like you should set a camera out and see what animal is eating it.
I don't know if I want to know if it's like a tiny dinosaur or.
The other question is are Chia Pets safe for animals to eat? Did Tim just poison an animal?
No, they are. I looked that up because because whenever we bring pets into the house, we want to make sure that they're safe for the cat. Yeah. And in fact, when we've bought plants and stuff in, we have actually looked to see that whether they're cat friendly.
That's good. That's a good idea.
And when I was looking about what might have eaten my Chia Pet, apparently it's perfectly safe for people to eat those chia shoots. And apparently some people eat them. It's fine. So I haven't poisoned anything. It's just good. Disturbing.
He's going to have a dream tonight that Chia Pet's like attacking his head or something. Tim is going to just wake up in a cold sweat.
I think I'm just going to take it out somewhere else and abandon it. I don't know what I'm going to do with it.
Rehome it on somebody's door.
Or wash it, or even if I like wash it and take it to the Goodwill, I feel that it's like bad juju's being passed on. I don't know. I don't know what I'm gonna do.
Yeah, with my trypophobia, the concept of Chia Pets already make my skin crawl. So when I saw that, I was like, nope. Good luck, Tim. You're on your own.
And the other quick tip I have for you: if you host a podcast with a close friend and decide that one week you're going to do a kind of funny food challenge, don't eat a massive piece of Black Forest cake just before the record, because then the thought of eating the food for this food challenge that we might be doing in the next couple of weeks would I couldn't do that.
No, but I will say when you showed us the Black Forest cake the other day, it did look good.
It's delicious. I just remembered at Christmas, it was a Christmas thing where you would have Black Forest gatto.
I don't know that I've ever heard of like Black Forest cake like specifically until you said it the other day.
Yeah, it's like chocolate cake and like the frosting, and then it has cherries on the top, and then in the layer it has like a cherry goo, rich cherry goo in it, or it's either raspberry or cherry, something like that.
I was going to ask, is it always cherry? Because I'm not a cherry fan, but it did look good when you had it up there.
Yeah, it's delicious. There's about half of it left, and I really want to finish it, but I fear my increasing years and eating the rest of that cake in a short period of time doesn't do one's waistline any good, you know.
Tim's blood sugar is just slowly going up as he's speaking.
Well, I mean, it's tail end of Christmas, really, and yeah, it'd be fine. We're not buying any more Black Forest cakes.
He'll be all Black Forest caked out. That's all he needs. I will say I did have a box of chocolates this weekend for Christmas, and I ate a lot of those. And then I had a cinnamon coffee cake from Starbucks today. So, you know.
I mean, see, for the people who are listening to this podcast, you'll probably get to hear this way after the fact, because we've got quite a few episodes in the bank that we've been using. But it's that weird middle ground between Christmas and New Year. And some people are working, some people are not working. Some people are meeting with relatives, but you've still got all the Christmas stuff in the house. UK friends have probably got tons of booze everywhere. And it's just that weird middle area. Once you get into New Year, it's like back to being business.
It resets.
Yeah, it's like back to business as usual.
Yeah, and it's like that time of, it's like no one knows what day it is. Like, what day is this? I think it's a Wednesday. Yeah, but it's weird because I didn't work at the beginning of the week and I'm off at the end of the week.
Yeah, it's a mess. I mean, nobody knows what's going on. I mean, it could be any day, it could be any time.
What can we say? We do it every year, though. And yeah, And our work specifically, Tim knows this. A lot of people use this because we get a pretty generous, can't say that word, a good amount of PTO. So a lot of people use it during this time of year.
Mm-hmm.
So half of our work's not there. So it kind of feels like we're kind of working and some of us are just sitting around staring at the walls.
Yeah, it's a difficult time for everyone when most of your meals have chocolate involved.
Yes. Well, Tim, finish the cake and then just take a chocolate break.
I think I will. I think they, assuming it doesn't go off, assuming it isn't attacked by the same thing that attacked the Chia Pet Hasselhoff, I'll finish it off, and then I'll be off the cake and the treats for just a little while.
The Chia Pet Hasselhoff is actually who stole Tim's recycling bin. If anybody was wondering, when he wasn't looking, it rolled away with it.
You've seen the picture, but I mean, the bite that's out the back of it wouldn't surprise me.
It was actually the recycling bin. It chomped it as revenge.
It could be the case.
All right, what's this topic, sir?
Okay, so I thought about obvious topics that we hadn't done yet, and I thought, well, maybe this is something we haven't tackled. And we've done a number of episodes which are like just one band or one artist that we've covered. And we done Queen, and we done Nile Rodgers, and we did Van Halen. And I thought, well, how is it we've missed this? This is like the big artist that you should cover. So this week's topic is going to be the music of the Beatles.
I thought about that too. And that's the way I felt also when I did the Dolly episode. I was like, how have we not done this yet?
Yeah, so I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of the Beatles and the fact that they were called the Quarrymen and the Silver Beatles and John Lennon and Stuart Sutcliffe and Pete Best. I'm not going to get into the kind of history of the Beatles, because I'd imagine even the most casual Beatles fan would know that.
Yes.
What I wanted to do was delve into the albums. Now, the interesting thing about the Beatles catalogue is that there are two distinct catalogues to the Beatles. The UK catalogue now is considered the definitive set of albums. And there's, we'll get to them, 12 or 13, or however many studio albums that is.
Okay.
In the United States, at the beginning of their career, Capitol Records, who had the Beatles, would release their own versions of Beatles albums, which had bits and pieces of the UK issues on them. And it was only sort of halfway through their career that the two catalogues started to combine. So now, as I said, now the UK catalogue is considered the definitive Beatles output, and the Capitol albums are to some degree seen as a little bit of an oddity. You can buy the Capitol albums in the United States, and you can probably buy them elsewhere now. But for most Beatles fans, the UK output is the definitive catalogue.
I mean, that makes sense. I think I've bought a little bit of both before.
Yeah, and I'm not going to get into like live albums. I'm not going to get into the anthology, and I'm not going to get into the mashup album Love or any of their collaborations, best ofs, past masters, all that stuff. I'm just going to be focusing on the core release studio albums that they did during their time. Okay. Now, the interesting thing about the Beatles is that they're huge. I mean, 50, 100, 200 years from now, people will have forgotten about Adele. People will have forgotten about Britney Spears. People have forgotten about, even Foo Fighters, whatever. These acts, they will be gone, but people will be sitting around discussing the relative merits of the Beatles.
I know. And that's what's so interesting. And even when you're looking at, I remember, what was it? Even if you go through like every Rolling Stone list, or you're watching a video and it's talking about pop acts or rock acts, or, pop rock as they're kind of considered, every single time to this day, it almost always the number one is, they're always going to say the number one of all time is the Beatles. It always comes, never fails.
Yeah. And the other thing that's interesting is the Beatles only existed as a band for 7 years.
I always find that very interesting, because I feel like in my mind, because I've heard that, well, I mean, I've seen it, and like I have the albums and that kind of stuff, kind of like you're saying, the basic Beatles fan. But I feel like in my mind, they're expanded. They expanded over such a long, like they affected and like influenced so many different types of music and so many different artists and so many people that in my mind, I feel like it was it had to be a long time, but it really was. It was actually very vacuum packed. It did like this very small vessel at time. They just managed to do something that you don't see every day.
Yeah, I mean, they changed the culture, they changed music, they changed the way music was recorded, they changed the way that record companies operate, live gigs, everything. Everything that happened around that time, they were involved with. But it was 7 years. That's it, beginning to end, in, out. I mean, I've been in cover bands longer than that.
I mean, yeah, there's plenty of things I've done for longer than 7 years.
Exactly.
It's crazy. It's weird to think about.
It is. So anyhow, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to dive into each one of these albums in turn, and I'm just going to pick out a couple of tracks off of each and just comment about the particular albums. And I'm going to start, which is where it began, with Please Please Me, which was their first studio album. Comes out in March 1963, and it's about half Lennon and McCartney and half covers. Now, it opens with I Saw Her Standing There.
Mm-hmm. And it's that famous, like the album cover is the one that's hanging over the rail, right?
Yeah. I mean, in fact, I'm showing, I mean, you can't see it on the podcast, but I'm showing it to Joy. And it is,
I can see it,
I think that was at EMI.
I've just seen that picture plenty of times before.
Yeah, and there's a compilation album. Well, there's two. There's the red compilation and the blue compilation where they recreate this shot like 10 years apart or something like that. It wouldn't be 10 years because they only lasted 7, but it was like 5 years apart or something.
Makes sense.
And one of them, they got short hair with the uniforms, and one they got long hair. But they've recreated that shot on those two album covers. But I mean, this album has got, as I said, it's got I Saw Her Standing on there, Saw Her Standing There, and it's got covers, Chains, Boys, and then you get into their own tracks, Please Please Me and Love Me Do. And then one thing I always thought, Twist and Shout, I always thought that was a Beatles song, but obviously it's not a Beatles song.
Mm-hmm. It's a remake, and it's one of those ones that they talk about. I hate to say this, was kind of whitewashed because it was actually done by somebody who was an African American. Who was it before the Beatles? But then they did. If you go and listen to the two versions, it's one of those historical pieces they talk about when they talk about that.
Yeah. Because they were playing a lot of the music that was popular. It's music that was being sold on 45 RPM
Isley
records.
Brothers.
Yeah,
the Isley Brothers. That's the original.
Yeah. But they were playing a lot of that music, and of course they'd just come back from Hamburg where they were playing all these sets, and they were playing what was popular at that time. Mm-hmm. So they knew all this stuff. This was the music that was making the money out in Hamburg.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a great song. I would have wanted to cover it, definitely. I can't blame them for that. But I mean, I would say out of the album, Twist and Shout is probably one of my top, but Love Me Do is great. That's probably my other favorite on this particular album. Yeah,
I like Love Me Do is good. I do like Please Please Me. That's a good track.
That is a good track.
But there we go. So they open with that. That's their first album. And then the next album that they have is with the Beatles. Now the previous album was released in March 63. This comes out in November 63. So they're knocking these albums out with amazing speed.
That's how they got it done in 7 years, Tim.
Exactly. And this album is the famous cover, the one where they're all in shadow, where it's lit from the side. And every band that you could imagine has done a promo press shot that's exactly like that. It's iconic.
I wonder do we know who took that photo? They had to have made a lot of money.
I'm not sure. I mean, I could go through the CD album notes and find it, but I don't know the photographer. But it's like the Queen thing from the Bohemian Rhapsody where they're all stacked up. It's like the Beatles started that with this iconic kind of photography.
And it's so iconic. It's almost like look at Andy Warhol with a Campbell's soup. Like it's just that iconic that you can see it without having to look at it.
Exactly. And I mean, like this album, again, it's about 50-50 original songs and 50-50 or 50 covers, I suppose. It's got All My Loving on here. It's got Please Mr. Postman, which is a cover. But again, that's a song that I would probably associate with the Beatles more than the original. And
it's done by what is it? The Shirelles or the Vandross, one of those bands.
One of those kind of artists, yeah.
Which was early 60s, I'd probably say. I don't know. Late 50s. But anyway, continue.
Yeah, and it's also got "I Want to Be Your Man," which is a Lennon and McCartney song on there, and it's got "Money, That's What I Want." And again, to some degree,
That's a remake too.
yeah, again, it's a remake, but I would probably consider the Beatles version. I mean, maybe not the definitive, but if I think of that song, I think of the version that's off with the Beatles.
I would say that too. But one cool thing I learned was because that was a Motown track. Money, That's What I Want, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of the original songs on Motown. And I was watching one of those Motown reunion concerts or whatever, Tim. And they're talking about that. They said everybody, they're talking about like even when they hear it, they think of it as a Beatles track. But they did this. It's like Quincy Jones and a couple of people, and they all were around the table. It might have been a piano, but I think it was mostly acoustic, almost like playing on the table type beat. And they sang "Money, That's What I Want." And they had a whole discussion. And that's a really cool clip talking about how that became a Beatles hit.
Mm-hmm. I'll have to, if you can find that, you should post that in the Facebook group.
Oh, well, it was like one of those Motown reunion, I'm talking about concert things they do all the time.
Exactly.
And they're sitting around a table. It was really cool.
Exactly. Well, so we go from there, and then in June '64, which is a little bit, maybe it's a tiny little bit after the fact.
Good Lord.
They're releasing A Hard Day's Night. Now, Hard Day's Night is the soundtrack to the film A Hard Day's Night, as well as being a studio album. An interesting fact about A Hard Day's Night, it came out and there's set pieces in it, there's comedy pieces in it, and then there's songs where they're playing and they're getting up to Beatles antics and all that type of stuff.
Lots of running around.
Yeah, running around in Hammersmith and Isleworth and places, Twickenham and places like that. The interesting thing, and I may have mentioned this before, but the Monkees, all the Monkees is the United States, I think it's NBC, ABC TV network, wanted their version of A Hard Day's Night. So they made the Monkees, and that's what the Monkees is. It's the US version of A Hard Day's Night.
And that makes complete sense when you look at it. And my mom always told me they were a manufactured band. I've heard this story a million times, but I see why. I mean, and I like the Monkees okay. I don't know that I like them more than A Hard Day's Night, though.
No.
If you watch the TV show and the movie.
To quote Carr from Knight Rider, I prefer the prototype rather than the inferior production line model.
Well, there you go. They're okay, but I mean, I'm not going to go out of my way to watch the Monkees. Honestly, their theme song was probably their best song.
Yeah. Well, I've been watching the Monkees slowly over the last year or two.
Yeah.
Like we watch an episode once in a while, and it's incredibly samey. So I like some of the songs. Some of their songs are good. The theme tune to the Monkees, of course, is the best.
That's what I was going to say. That's when I think of the Monkees. All I think is, hey, hey, we're the Monkees. That's all I think. So, to be fair, their theme song did really sell it for me.
Yeah. So anyway, so we have this Hard Day's Night album, and I think this is the point where they start writing everything. So this is credited all to Lennon and McCartney. And of course, once again, George Martin is the producer. He's produced the other two albums, and he continues to produce almost all of their output. And George Martin was I think he was like a classical producer or something before he got involved with the Beatles. But, he became effectively the fifth Beatle. He was a sounding board for them. He played piano and harpsichord in a lot of their tracks and really gave them the direction that they needed.
And I mean, that's kind of all I ever associate him with, is the Beatles.
Yeah, he went on to he produced albums for Aerosmith, Jeff Beck. Lots of other artists wanted to work with George Martin because he was the Beatles guy.
I can't say I'd blame them. I'd want to try that too.
And also he produced a lot of McCartney's solo stuff after the Beatles finished.
That makes sense. I will say this album, though, is probably get some of this one's the one that's got obviously Can't Buy Me Love, Hard Day's Night. Mm-hmm. Isn't maybe Tell Me Why on this one?
Yep, that's on there. And the title track, Hard Day's Night, it has that chord, the famous Beatles chord, where I forget what it is. It's like a G sharp minor seventh flat something. I mean, I can play guitar, but I don't know what that stuff is. But I've seen there's videos, YouTube tutorials of how to do it, and you need one guitar playing one thing and one guitar playing another thing and a bass playing another thing, and it's like when you play the elements by themselves, it doesn't sound right, but when you play the three together, it's like
Some
There's the
secret
sound.
chord.
Yeah, the famous Beatles.
Is that
chord.
what Jesus played when he praised the Lord or whatever? I hope people got that joke. That's from a song, everybody. You know the famous chord that Jesus played when he praised the Lord. Anyway, that's a song. Look it up. I'm not lying. But no, that's funny. And that's what's weird about, that's true about chords, though. Like when I was taking piano, or me and Tim have been talking about my chords on the ukulele, guitar chords, whatever. Technically, you can make up your own chord if you want to. Really, anybody can.
Oh, sure. And, if you know enough about music theory, whatever notes you string together, there is a name for that.
Mm-hmm.
But I've never, I can play guitar. I play in bands. I've recorded stuff. I can do that. I've recorded albums. I just don't know music theory.
I took music theory in college, but I wouldn't say I'm wonderful at it by any stretch. To be honest, the two classes I took in music theory, my professor was really boring, so didn't really stick with me. I can read music. Like if you give me a grand staff, I could say that's a C, that's an A. I could do that. But.
Yeah, I couldn't do that. I remember years ago. This was before smartphones. This is when you had Nokia phones and ones that didn't have fancy features. And at one time when you'd get them and you couldn't program a ringtone on it. And then you get certain ones where you could upload a MIDI file into the phone and then it would go blip, 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 and it would play whatever tune you wanted it to play.
Sounded like those ones that you press on the Casio.
Yeah, it was that kind of idea. And I wanted to program it to play something. And it was probably the theme from Knight Rider, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. But it came with a program where you could upload a MIDI file into it. So I got a MIDI editor where you'd have the stave and you could move the notes around. And I could play it on the guitar, and I just couldn't work out where the notes on the guitar were on the stave. And I played with it for about half an hour, and I'm like, I'm done. It can just ring. It's fine.
2 times I've done that. So on the Nintendo Switch, when you're playing what's known as Animal Crossing, you can set up music that plays on your island, and it's a MIDI file. So when you go to like the main little place, you can go in there and you can pick. And I got it to play Love Me Tender because, that's based off of a nursery rhyme. Mm-hmm. So I knew the notes. So I put in the notes for the nursery rhyme. And so if you go on my island on Animal Crossing, it's just playing Love Me Tender in the background. And then when Charlie was working on the little Zoltar thing he was talking about, and he was trying to program it, I programmed Mary Had a Little Lamb by ear because I couldn't figure out what their how it was supposed to go, because in the code. So I just kept trying it until I was like, Mary, until I found the one that matched. And then I just kept like, and I Googled, I could Google what are the notes that Mary Had a Little Lamb, but I kind of figured that out. But that wasn't the point. It didn't say C, or I would have known it was C. I just sit there and I did exactly probably what you did, Tim. I just kept pressing until I found Mary. Okay, that's Mary. The 2 times I've done something similar.
Oh, well, anyhow, so we move on to the next Beatles album. This is Beatles for Sale. It comes out in December 1964. And again, Hard Day's Night came out in June. This comes out in December. They're just knocking this stuff out.
I feel like, and don't get me wrong, this is not that I'm a huge Beatles fan. Tim can tell you can't see in my room behind me. There's tons of Beatles posters right behind my head. There was a lot of drugs that kept them awake at night.
True, but equally their work ethic. They were out playing gigs, and then they were spending the rest of their time at Abbey Road making this stuff.
Well, and what's crazy though? If you get somebody who has that work ethic, I've heard it from other musicians too. If you're good at writing music, some of them say some of their most popular songs were written in 5 minutes.
Yeah,
that's crazy to me.
We've said before, Dolly Parton wrote I Will Always Love You and Jolene in the same day.
Well, and Dolly talks about, I don't know if you see it, there's this thing where she plays on her nails. Have you seen it?
Yeah, I've seen that.
That's on her acrylics. So she was teaching, I think it was Patti LaBelle on this interview where she's she's literally playing it on her nails. She said she was walking around set and kept was thinking like a typewriter. Mm-hmm. That was, she wrote the song on her acrylic nails, everybody. Come on. But that's where that comes from. And I think they say on one of the versions, I don't know if it's the one you still hear, you can actually hear her nails or something like that. But I have not confirmed that to be true.
It wouldn't surprise me. Not with the magical world of Dolly.
See, so basically, I'm just not talented enough to write songs in 5 minutes, but there are people out there who can do it.
Yeah, I mean, like this album, like Beatles for Sale, has 14 tracks on it. There are a couple of covers. They've gone back to doing a couple of covers on here, but I mean, the bulk of this stuff is theirs. I mean, they cover Chuck Berry's rock and roll music on here. They do a couple of other songs which are covers. They do a Carl Perkins song as well. But like this has got like Mr. Moonlight as well as a cover. But I mean, like as far as Lennon and McCartney is concerned, I'm a Loser, No Reply, Babies in Black, I'll Follow the Sun. Again, this is all good stuff, Beatles. I mean, it's just where's this coming from?
And another iconic picture on the front of the cover too.
Yeah, this one is just their shot, and I think it's like leaves or something in that's slightly out of focus at the bottom.
Yeah, I think so. The weird part for me is I realize why they seem so familiar to me. I forget that I have the band poster on the wall with all the different albums that I see every day.
So
it might be.
You know this stuff intimately. Okay, so we go from there, and the next album is Help. Now, Help was released in the UK. I'm going with the UK release date, so it's August 65. So they had just a little bit of a break, not too long of a break, but just a little bit of a break before they come out with this.
Yeah.
And again, Help is the soundtrack to another film. They were being developed as a recording artist and as movie stars, much like Elvis was at this time.
Yeah, and all I think of is when it's like when they're jumping and they yell help, like the physical jumping in the air, because I think that's from the movie, but I don't remember 100%.
Exactly, and this one we're back to all Lennon and McCartney, and I think there is a Ringo Starr track on here, but I don't have all the listings to hand. But I mean, this has got Help on it. You got Hide Your Love Away, and of course, it has Ticket to Ride on here,
which is one of my favorites. I mean, I like You've Got to Hide Your Love Away a lot too. Actually, that's album. I have more of my favorite songs on it than any of the other ones.
And of course, how could you forget the penultimate track on this album is Yesterday?
Yes. Which, what was it I heard? Maybe you've heard this fact. It had a different name originally, Yesterday did. And they were singing a different, I'll have to Google it. Yesterday didn't start, McCartney was talking about this on some interview. It wasn't Yesterday, and they were singing a different word, and I thought that was weird because like the whole song's built on the idea of yesterday.
Yeah, I think his working lyric was ham and eggs or something like that.
Yeah, and I'm like, how did? Because like it feels like to me, Yesterday's the obvious choice because that's the whole point of the song.
Yeah, and it has a very unique strumming pattern as well. Like if you try and play it conventionally, it doesn't work. There's a way that you kind of flick the strings, and it's
a picking pattern.
Yeah, so it's very weird. And when I saw Paul McCartney, I suppose it's almost 10 years ago, I saw him in Greensboro, and he played Yesterday, and I don't know, I felt. It was great seeing Paul McCartney, but seeing Paul McCartney by himself play Yesterday was almost worth the price of admission.
That's crazy. Well, and when you watch Paul McCartney, he commands a stage so well. And he's so like genuine and authentic, I think, as a person when I see him, that I can only imagine him playing that by himself would just be fantastic.
Yeah, the way they had the stage there, it had some kind of riser that came up, so it lifted him up like into the arena, and it had like blue lighting around it. And of course, Paul McCartney's guitar collection, he hangs on to that stuff. The stuff that his bass, his Hofner bass he plays live now, was the same one he played with the Beatles, and his Epiphone Casino, I think, guitar he has, he played in the Beatles. So I think the guitar he played on Yesterday was the same one that's on the track. I think it's the same Gibson J45, I think.
That's pretty cool. I mean, I wonder, though, I hate to say this, when he passes, if he's already written out a will, who's going to get all that stuff? Or if it's just going to go to his estate?
I don't know. I'm just assuming Paul McCartney's going to last forever.
Yeah, I mean, what am I talking about? He's invincible. Yeah.
As is Ringo, because Ringo's all about peace and love. Peace and love.
I know. He looks so young for his age, Ringo Stardust.
Oh, he's almost 90 years old, Ringo Starr. He's
That's
great.
so weird. He looks like he's like in his 50s or his 60s. Of course, he eats like there was no Black Forest cake for him.
No.
Sorry, Tim. If you want to live to 90, you're gonna have to start skipping out of the Black Forest cake. And but what's funny is I didn't know the topic of this episode when I sent Tim a link about the Beatles where it was talking about who was it that was talking about his drumming?
John Bonham.
Yeah, Bonham was talking about his drumming, and it was actually kind of funny because it's like John Bonham's like, well, for what he does, the pop and the rock world, that's what he does, and that's what he does really well. But then on the flip side, Ringo is talking about John Bonham's not that nicely. But I sent Tim an article saying this is a great read. Not even 30 minutes before we got on here.
You knew, Joy. I mean, we never discussed what we're going to talk about, but you knew somehow. You knew that.
There we go. Yeah. So Ringo, you were somehow on my mind, and then it all came to be.
There we are. Well, so the next album that we have is Rubber Soul. Now, Rubber Soul comes out in December 1965.
Good Lord.
And I think as far as sort of Beatles songwriting and the direction that the band is taking, I think this is where I would say definitively become the Beatles, but this is good, really, really, really good stuff.
And I think that's historically, this is when they, they flip the switch, I guess. Mm-hmm. This is Rubber Soul's known as that when you do any type of like looking at their albums across the board. Yeah,
they were sort of, prior to this, they were sort of, I suppose teeny bop is not the right word, but it was kind of like pop music-y.
It was pop rock.
Yeah, poppy type stuff. And this, they started to form the direction that they would take with their later albums and the more sort of psychedelic-y kind of stuff. Unlike on here, you have Drive My Car, Norwegian Wood, Nowhere Man, The Word, Girl, Run for Your Life. I mean, this is I think where they really get into their definitive songwriting and music.
And I mean, I love Nowhere Man so much. As soon as you say that, that's like one of my all-time favorite songs.
And of course, you can't think of Nowhere Man without thinking of Yellow Submarine.
Of course. Yep. Yeah, I mean, and this is when they really became, because like everybody says, they're known as the number one rock band. But to be fair, up to this point, they really were more of a pop rock band. Mm-hmm. This is where they found their soul, I guess.
And this cover is of Rubber Soul is quite unique as well, because again, it's the four of them with the Rubber Soul in the sort of 60s psychedelic sort of lettering. Yeah. But it has a weird effect on it. And what happened is that they went to the photo studio of the person who took this photograph or the series of photographs from this shoot. Mm-hmm. And they were they thought it was cool and all. And then the guy puts the slide in the projector and it didn't sit right. And because it didn't sit right, it projected it at a funny angle.
Oh, okay.
And Paul said, that's it. That's what we're having. I want that. And the guy's like, well, the slide's not incorrect. He said, I don't care. He said, what's up on the screen now where it's like that, that's the shot.
Well, think about it. Rubber, kind of like a rubbery kind of, you know what I mean? Like it fits that kind of rubbery, kind of bubbly thing that they were going for.
Exactly. Yeah. But yeah. That's where the cover came from. But so off the back of Rubber Soul, a lot of people consider their next album Revolver, which was came out in August 66. This is almost like a companion album to Rubber Soul, Revolver. A lot of the tracks are in a very similar vein. Like with Queen, where you have Night of the Opera and Day of the Races are like companion pieces. A lot of people consider this to be the companion album to Rubber Soul.
I guess that makes sense. And it has a cool cover too.
Yeah, this is it's sort of an art collage, some drawn, some photographs, and it was done by the Dutch art group called The Fool, I believe.
I just noticed the black and white one that they're drawing on.
and The Fool are the same people who painted Eric Clapton's SG, that psychedelic paint job.
Oh, that's cool, actually. Wow.
Yeah, they were around at that time doing that kind of stuff. But like Revolver, you have Taxman, you have Eleanor Rigby, I'm Only Sleeping, Here, There and Everywhere. She said, Good Day Sunshine, Dr. Robert. I mean, this is fabulous. And of course, it has a Ringo Starr written song on here, Yellow Submarine.
Which it's iconic. I know that, like, so I don't know. I don't know how to explain. You know, a lot of people get there's very heightened thoughts about Ringo Starr's songwriting and drumming. But like for me, he's a Beatle. His songs are iconic. He does well when I was reading that article, he talked about how he was never going to be a drummer who liked to do drum solos. That wasn't his thing. Mm-hmm. He said, I follow time, I keep tempo, and I keep the song going. He said, and that's what I do. And now I'm like, that makes so much sense because exactly what he does.
One thing I like about Ringo is he appears to be very straightforward compared to the others. The others are very arty, and the others, were doing all this stuff, and they were doing acid, and and thinking, to turn on and tune in and drop out and all that kind of stuff. And then like Ringo's just like very, very down to earth. Like there's a really cool story. Have you ever seen the Beatles anthology movies that came out with the anthology?
Yeah, I actually have.
Yeah, I rewatched it about a year ago, and they all go out to India to spend time with this guru. And they're going to find themselves or embrace Indian culture or all the things they were going to do. And then in the end, George Harrison became very influenced by this. And he took up the sitar and things like that. Ringo was not really about this. So he goes out with the Beatles. He said he didn't like Indian food. So in his suitcase, he took baked beans with him.
That's so British.
Yeah. And then he stayed for a while because all the other guys were into it. And after a while, he said, oh, lads, I've had enough of this. And I think he went skiing or something and went home.
I mean, that's fair because I made the joke, Elton John over here thinking he's bigger than Jesus. And then you're right. Of course, Paul McCartney, didn't he step into some religious thing for a little while too? I know George Harrison did, obviously, but didn't Paul McCartney do something religious with Indian culture?
I think they were all very much into that.
Yeah, and you're right. Ringo's just like, peace him out. It doesn't seem his style.
I think if these days, if you was going to hang out with the two remaining Beatles, I think as cool as it would be to spend time with Paul McCartney, I think if you hung out with Ringo, it would be more fun. It
probably would be. My dad was always a big fan of Ringo's solo work because my father, with the time, sorry, Dad, I'm going to put you on the spot here, was the time frame that he was alive was the height of the Beatles. So he kind of got a little bit tired of the Beatles music, like the Beatles mania type thing. Mm-hmm. So he actually always used to say Ringo was his favorite and he liked Ringo's solo work. And now I kind of get it because, he was like the most down to earth kind of, and he looks like you could have fun with him, though. Like, if you hear him talk and he's just very normal.
Yeah, the guitar player, Steve Lukather, who's the guitar player in Toto, and he's a very well-respected session guitar player, and he played on Michael Jackson's Thriller, and he played on Physical, and he's played everything you could ever imagine Steve Lukather plays on. He's been around the world 100 times in different bands doing different stuff.
Yeah.
He said the reason that he got into music is he saw the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show.
Yeah.
And all these years later, he's now playing in Ringo Starr's all-star band, which is his touring band.
That's
and
so cool.
That blew my mind utterly. But he said what blows my mind even more is that Ringo Starr is probably one of my best friends. I have Ringo Starr's phone number, and he texts me sometimes. And he said, my mind is blown. He said, I just cannot even begin to understand how this happened in my life.
And you know that it would never it would never not feel weird. Like, it would always be like, oh, and that's Ringo Starr calling me right now. Okay, well, I should answer.
Yeah, and apparently Ringo Starr likes Steve Lukather because Steve Lukather has sort of got a bit of a salty sense of humor, and it appeals to Ringo. So, he'll text Ringo a filthy joke, and then Ringo will call him and say it's funny. I mean, he said, how did this ever happen?
Yeah, I can't imagine sending a meme to Ringo Starr.
Yeah.
That would be, and I feel like, I don't know, maybe this is in my own mind, and maybe because he's been knighted now. I don't know that Sir Paul McCartney. I don't know if I could send him meme pictures. I don't know that I could.
No, you couldn't do that. But I think Ringo go, oh, that's a bit funny, that is. I like that.
I will say, though, I mean, Paul McCartney doesn't seem that extreme. Like, when you watch him in interviews and stuff, he doesn't seem arrogant or anything. He's just a little less down to earth, I guess.
Yeah, but I mean, it must affect you being that famous for so long. And I don't know, but I know Paul McCartney likes to travel on public transport, and he likes to do things that everybody does because he feels that he doesn't want to lose touch. And he said some of the best conversations he'd ever had in his life was where he'd been in New York working on an album or something, and he'd get the public transit bus from the hotel to the studio because he just wanted to be like he's going to work like everyone else was.
I wonder how many people were like sitting beside him on the train, right? You're just going to work. You never think in a million years Paul McCartney is going to get on the train beside you. And you look up, you're like, that kind of looks like Paul. That can't be Paul McCartney. That's not Paul McCartney. And they just disregarded it. You know what I mean? And now the whole way they work, they're like, was that actually him? No, that wasn't him. That couldn't have been him. It was just some guy who happened to look like him. Because that would be me.
Yeah, there was a march, I think in New York City, or Los Angeles, I can't remember, a while ago about gun control and gun violence. And Paul McCartney was a part of that. And then someone interviewed him and said, well, why are you here? He said, I lost my friend to gun violence. It's really important to me.
I know.
And it's not like there's a massive entourage. He was just there, just like with everyone else.
Yeah. I've seen, and then I know we've talked about this, but I really liked, and I know the carpool karaoke's are fake, but I like the Paul McCartney carpool karaoke because he went back to his hometown and he went to Penny Lane and he went to the barber shop and then he visited his house and he did this little thing where there was the bathroom. Like he talked about, here's the piano, here's the bathroom. And he talked about how it was the tiniest little cramped, like in Europe, the elevators are the tiniest. That's what the size of this bathroom was. Basically, he said that him and John Lennon would write almost every one of their songs in there because the bathroom's always known to have the best acoustics, which we've talked about before. But he said we play at the piano, but this is where we wrote like half our songs.
Yeah,
so that's cool.
I've seen that, but it does work with the fact I'm no fan of James Cordon. I'm
Well, he's becoming less and less liked by the world. So Tim, he may fade out here soon.
Have you ever looked up his Ask Me Anything Reddit? Are you familiar with this?
I know what Ask Me Anything is, but I've never seen James Cordon.
Okay, so I can't remember how I got onto this Googling, but anyhow.
Okay.
A lot of people do these Ask Me Anything Reddits, and they're curated to some degree. But you'll get I follow
the page.
Yeah, so you'll get a famous person on there. Most of the time they're trying to promote something, but sometimes people just do it just for fun. And it's like, hey, I'm Tom Cruise, ask me anything. And then you get lots of wacky questions, but sometimes they'll answer them, sometimes they'll ignore them. But for the most part, most of the questions, certainly near the beginning of where it starts, they will be answering them, or most of them. Mm-hmm. And the James Corden one.
Oh, God.
Almost everyone was like, is it true that you're all right? That word we shouldn't say on the podcast. And it's that over and over and over again. It's like, my brother worked with you on blah, blah, blah show. Mm-hmm. And he said that you were blah. And then they literally answer one question.
So that's what I was getting at, that he's on his way to being out because that's out in the world now. But I remember, because I did watch his show occasionally, not like regularly, but if like I was scrolling through YouTube and I saw one that looked funny, I would, click it. So that's like the carpool karaoke. So there's this one skit where they eat like weird food. You ask a question. If they don't answer, they have to eat like a cow tongue or something, right? Something really gross. Or something like that. So there was this one, and I think it was like 1,000-year-old egg or something, like the Chinese 1,000-year-old eggs, and it absolutely looked disgusting. And who was it?
Is this the one with Jimmy Kimmel?
Was it what? All I remember was they asked James Corden what the name of his
yes,
some of the crewmen.
Yeah. This was Jimmy Kimmel.
Okay,
and
you know what I'm talking
is
about.
Never afraid to call people out. So Jimmy Kimmel was on his show as a guest doing this truth or dare eating or whatever it's called. And he said, "Okay, can you name one person on your camera crew right now?"
And it just got so silent. And then he ended up having to eat whatever the eyeball was or whatever in front of him.
Because Jimmy Kimmel's crew and staff are like his family, and he knows them all, and he knows everything about what's going on. He's so involved with it.
Yeah. But this was prior to kind of like everything coming out. And now I realize that moment was so like detrimental because like I've seen all the, articles and things coming out about it. But I was like, at that moment, I was like, dang, you can't even, you know what I mean, Tim? Like at work, we know everybody. Everybody, it seems so weird to me not to know someone that close to you working with you every day.
It's sure. I mean, like where we work, if we ask one of the top people in our organisation, what's the name? Can you give us a couple of the names of the cleaning crew? They might not know everybody in the cleaning crew, but they might say, oh, yeah, that's Bob and that's Jane. And I think
they know the ones they interact with every day.
Yeah, that's Phil or whatever. They would know that. But like you think you're like James Cordon and you're running this show and it's got your name on it and it's your show, you should know who the crew is.
I know. And then it just, that poor guy behind the camera probably just wanted to scream at the top of his lungs because, like, it's almost an insult to those people's work because they put just as much work into making that show happen as he does.
Oh, sure.
Anyway, I thought that was a hilarious question, and I'm glad I couldn't remember who it was, but I remember when they asked him that it just got so weirdly silent in the whole studio.
Well, it was like Jimmy Kimmel. Do you remember the whole thing with Conan and Jay Leno?
Yeah.
Where Jay Leno left the Tonight Show, then Conan got the Tonight Show, and then Conan flopped, and then Jay Leno came back to the. It was a mess. Yes. And equally, Jimmy Kimmel was on Jay Leno's show in doing some kind of thing, and then halfway through it, he just was like, "It's like, come on, just Jay, just give Conan a break for goodness' sake. It's not cool. It's honestly not cool." Yep. And he was just like squirming.
Ooh, I love it though. I love that kind of tension. But yeah, poor good old James. Well, and to be fair, unfortunately, I hate to say this, but Ellen DeGeneres has gotten the same kind of backlash.
Yeah, I always thought Ellen DeGeneres was cool, and then you hear about what went on
behind stage, and it's like, ooh,
yeah.
Well, and let's just be honest. Some of that could be playing into the hype because the truth is always somewheres in the middle, right, Tim? Mm-hmm. You got this person's story, you got this person's story, and the truth is probably somewheres in the middle. So I'm not going to take everything I'm hearing as 100%, but when you start hearing all these stories and it just starts getting more and more and more, you have to wonder, the truth is leaning a little bit closer to the. And I've been watching, speaking of interviews, there's a few different interviews. If you go back and watch Ellen's interactions with people, sometimes she's a little off the cuff, and it seems awkward now that you know what you know.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, back to the Beatles. That took a
Oh yeah, I forgot this is a music podcast where we talk about things. I forgot about that.
We're just discussing the poor cameraman who had to sit on stage that night.
Okay, so we just had Revolver about 40 minutes ago before we got into US late night TV, and the next album that the Beatles come out with in May 1967 is the iconic Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Now, I have a copy of this. I'm waving a CD around on the Zoom camera, but you can't see that. But downstairs, I have a vinyl copy of this that was purchased on the 26th of May 1967 by my dear mum because she bought it the day it came out. And as it's the only family heirloom I have, I've inherited it early, and I've got it downstairs. So my mum gave it to me for safekeeping. So I have an original mono copy that she purchased the day it was released.
I have to imagine that's got to be worth quite a bit, like monetary wise.
Not really.
No, really? I would think so.
Well, I mean, this album, it's gone platinum 11. Oh, yeah. In the United States, it's gone to platinum 11 times. In the UK, it's gone to platinum 18 times. So the fact that it's an original copy from when it was released, there's thousands, if not millions of copies of that floating about.
No, well, I still would keep it for safe,
Yeah,
safe
I mean,
place.
it's priceless in so much it's my mum's record. And when she comes to visit, I always play it. And she's given it to me for safekeeping. But it's not valuable in monetary. I think it's worth $100 or something. It's not terribly valuable.
Well, that's still a cool story and something for you to have for the rest of your life. So
exactly, but Sgt. Pepper is considered the first concept album. When we were talking about the Beatles changing music and changing how things are done, all the tracks run from one into the other, which hadn't been done until that point. And then you've got, obviously, the Sgt. Pepper's track, Little Help from My Friends, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, which, of course, is about a picture that Julian Lennon drew when he was at school and brought it home to his dad. Nothing to do with drugs.
Absolutely.
Getting Better, Fixing a Hole, She's Leaving Home, Mr. Kite, When I'm 64. I mean, what else can you say about Sgt. Pepper?
And then you've got the whole thing with like Peter Frampton and the Bee Gees and all that kind of side of it, too.
Yeah, well, that the Sgt. Pepper's movie and associated soundtrack. Yeah.
So that was a cool concept too, which was done by Martin again. So
yeah, all these sort of Beatles offshoot projects often were done by George Martin.
Plus, I wonder though, on the front of it, where it's got the iconic the word Beatles and the flowers. Isn't there something about that? Like there's like a hidden gem or something? Yeah.
So what the Beatles wanted. They wanted Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band to be another band making the album. And that's what it originally started as, but that sort of concept sort of fell off as they went through the album. But the cover has the Beatles waxworks from Madame Tussauds in the audience, and then they're dressed as Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And then all the stars around the outside were people who the Beatles wanted to be watching this concert. Now they are just photographs pasted up on bits of wood when it was shot, but that's the concept of it.
That's what I thought. I was like, there's a reason behind it, but I couldn't remember.
Now the thing that people say is weird about this is there's a guitar at the bottom, and apparently the person who bought the flowers or the person who did some of the set dressing or something said to the designer, he said, oh, maybe we should put a guitar in there. And he said, oh, that's cool. Well, let's make a guitar out of flowers. But some people say if you look at the guitar in a certain way, it says Paul and a question mark.
Oh, my gosh. You're kind of right, though.
And there was this whole conspiracy at the time that Paul McCartney died and was replaced by his brother.
That's where I was going to say he's going to live on. We were joking about him living on forever. I was thinking about the whole, and then there's the joke that he's immortal. Oh,
yeah, but if you look at that guitar, and in fact, if you're listening to the podcast, pull it up on your phone or whatever and have a look at the photograph. The yellow guitar supposedly says Paul and a question mark.
I really see the question mark and I see the P, but towards the middle, it kind of just looks like FU. Sorry.
I mean, that could be correct. I mean, I don't know.
Just saying, that's kind of what it looks like from my perspective.
And another interesting Ringo fact. So I read the booklet for this recently because I listened to this not that long ago. So all of the Beatles had very clear ideas of who they wanted to be in the audience. And John Lennon had, he wanted very dark things. He wanted Hitler to be in it, but the record company vetoed it. And then George Harrison wanted mostly gurus to be in it. And they asked Ringo, they said, Ringo, who do you want in the audience? He said, oh, whatever the other guys want, I don't mind.
Of course. Oh, gosh. Of course you'd want. But now that you say that, the John Lennon Hitler thing kind of makes...
Yeah, if you read the book, there was a number of people that the Beatles wanted. And either some people wanted a fee or some people wouldn't agree to be on the Beatles cover. Or there was things like EMI, the record company, said, no, that's too controversial. We're not going to have that person in the audience. You
know what, though? If you'd asked John Lennon why he wanted Hitler, he probably had this whole spiel that he would have gave you, explaining the exact thought process behind it.
Yeah, it wasn't a throwaway thought. There was a process behind that.
He was always like that, though. When everyone asked him a very just direct question, he always had you know what I mean, Tim? There was a 37 long string of words that he wanted to say.
Exactly. All right. So from Sgt. Pepper's, we move on to Magical Mystery Tour. Magical Mystery Tour, November 1967. Again, a film that goes along with this. And the interesting thing about the film, so the Beatles had been away in Beatles terms, for a little while. The last album was May, and this comes out in November. So people hadn't heard from the Beatles for a while. And this was the time where they stopped touring. So you hadn't heard of the Beatles. So the Beatles, in effect, were making a little bit of a comeback with this. And it was massively hyped that the Magical Mystery Tour film was going to be shown on BBC Two on Boxing Day. Okay. And for our US friends, Boxing Day is the day after Christmas, and in England it's celebrated the same as Christmas.
It's the day where they gave them the box, the laborers, they get boxes from their work from like their work and stuff, like basic day laborers. And usually they had that day off because they didn't have Christmas off or something. I read this yesterday.
Yeah.
I looked it up yesterday.
You would be correct. So, Boxing Day is a big day, and Magical Mystery Tour is going to be coming on, and everyone thinks, yes, the Beatles are back. And if you've ever seen Magical Mystery Tour, I think it's fair to say they were probably chemically assisted when that film was made.
Yeah.
It's kind of.
I didn't watch the whole thing. I'm not going to lie. I've just seen bits and pieces.
It's kind of wacky and out there.
Yeah.
And it was huge controversy apparently in 1967 when this came out.
Well, and that's right when Brian Epstein died, right?
It was. I think it was. I don't have the timeline, but it was around. It was around that
close
sort
to
of
that time. That's what I thought.
But the actual songs on this album are superb. Magical Mystery Tour, Fool on the Hill, Blue Jay Way, Your Mother Should Know. And then this actually has songs which I think came out as singles around the same time. Hello, Goodbye, Strawberry Fields Forever and Penny Lane, which were actually recorded as part of the Sgt. Pepper sessions, but made it onto Magical Mystery Tour instead.
Have you ever heard of where John Lennon credits I Am the Walrus coming from?
What I heard is that there was some professor or there was some college course or something who was trying to dive into the deep meaning of Lennon lyrics and how he was interpreting this and how he was interpreting that. And Lennon got wind of it, and then he just made up I Am the Walrus of nonsense. He thought, well, see what they make of that.
Yeah, so I've heard that, but then I've also heard that it's like one thing with the LSD, of course, but then he says Lewis Carroll's The Walrus and the Carpenter. Mm-hmm. Have you ever heard of that poem? Apparently it was influenced on that. Now, that doesn't mean he didn't use that as the reference for what you're talking about, but I've heard that poem influenced the song.
Yeah, it could be. Either way could have worked. But the other thing that you have on here is All You Need Is Love. And I mean, that is so iconic in the realm of the Beatles catalogue.
Of course. Oh, Ed, I gave it a Goog, as you would say, and I looked it up. So, yes, it is saying that it's the Walrus and the Carpenter from Through the Looking Glass, but amused by. So, basically, he had a letter that came from a fan at his former high school in which they learned that an English teacher there was affording the Beatles lyrics a scholarly interpretation. Amused by this, Lennon set out to write a lyric that would confuse analysis from scholars and musical journalists. So that's why he used the poem. So in addition to drawing the Carol's imagery, Shakespeare's King Lear, he reworked a nursery rhyme from school days and referenced Edgar Allan Poe. Mm-hmm. And James Joyce. The author, Jonathan, I don't know how to say this guy's last name, I Am the Walrus is the most literary song that the Beatles would ever write. And basically, John Lennon thought it was funny. He just picked different like historical literature things. He like the poem like that to base what you're talking about, Tim, and to make them think that it was something high and mighty.
When in fact, it was just Lewis Carroll stuff and nonsense just for his own entertainment. Which
is funny, all from a letter, which I was in a few English classes where my professors would try to, like in college and stuff, would take like modern day literature or like modern day pop stuff, TV shows, music, whatever, and put like analysis on it. Like I remember I had one that we talked a whole lot about that song, Don't You Forget About Me. Mm-hmm. And because of the whole thing where it was in the Breakfast Club, and now it's used in everything related to like going back to school, like the Gap commercial and stuff. I had an English teacher who did like a whole analysis on that, so I could see how this would happen.
There we are. Well,
sorry if you listen. I'm not insulting you, English professor. I don't even remember what your name was, but if you're listening, that wasn't an insult. I promise.
Okay, well, let's move on to the next Beatles album. Well, we're almost getting towards the end of wrapping up the catalogue, but from there, in November 1968, we have the White Album. Now, it's called the White Album, but it's not called the White Album. It's actually just called The Beatles. And the White Album is unique in their catalogue that it's a studio album, but it's a double. And it's one of those, I mean, it's got great songs on it, but it's one of those songs I think that could have done with an editor, because you could have made an absolutely stellar single album, whereas the White Album has got some filler, it's fair to say.
Yeah, I would say it's probably my least favorite album by the Beatles.
I would think so. I mean, I have the deluxe reissue that came out a few years ago where it was remastered and remixed by Giles Martin. And it has an extra CD of sessions, and outtakes and things like that. But I mean, this is the album that has Revolution 9 on it. And Revolution 9 is just some guy number 9, number 9. And I mean, how do you go from, I don't know, Magical Mystery Tour and Penny Lane to
Love Me Do
to like weird sound effects and going number 9?
It could have been that Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds thing.
It could have been, or the fact is you may have had to scrape John Lennon off the ceiling of Abbey Road at that time. I don't know.
Pretty much. That's also what I've heard. They changed, Tim. Things change,
Yeah, but I mean, you got Back in the USSR, Dear Prudence, Glass Onion, Obla Di Obla Da.
Which is one of my favorites.
And of course it has While My Guitar Gently Weeps. Now, which features Eric Clapton. Now, we've gone into the realm of Eric Clapton and his various beliefs and what have you, and I don't think we need to repeat that. But it's probably the first time you see another artist on a Beatles album.
Yeah. And I mean, he still plays that song to this day all the time.
Sure.
And it was like, it's just as much credited to the Beatles as it is to him. You know what I mean? A lot of times if you play with the Beatles, the only person that's getting like everybody's talking about is the Beatles. But I mean, everybody I feel like associates My Guitar Gently Weeps with Eric Clapton.
Yeah, the original pressings of the White Album or the Beatles didn't reference Eric Clapton. It was like Andrea Mistrioso or something like that, because he was under contract to a different record label. But in subsequent pressings, and I'm sure since 1980 something or whatever, it's always been Eric Clapton on there.
Yeah, and I'm just saying, like, from a person's perspective, I associate that song just as much with them and him. But yeah, I mean, it's a great track, and it's like we've always told you guys that one of the best concerts or one of the best like videos you watch on YouTube is when all the artists got together and play it.
Yeah, the George Harrison benefit, which has Prince playing guitar on it,
and Tom Petty's pretty much leading the whole thing.
Sure, and it has Jeff Lynne and
there's multiple heads all over the audio, all over the stage.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so we go from the Beatles, and now we get into another film, and it's a soundtrack to that film, which is Yellow Submarine. And what's interesting about Yellow Submarine, and I didn't know this until way after the fact, so like when I was younger, Yellow Submarine was one of those films that I had on videotape. Now, my relationship with the realm of film, as we've discussed, is not fully embracing. There's 20 or so films that I like, and I just like to watch them over and over. Right? It's hard to bring a new one into my viewing, if you will. And most of those came from tapes that I had when I was growing up, and I was in a school holiday, and I'd play them over and over. And one of those ones was Yellow Submarine. Now, when I saw Yellow Submarine, I assumed it was voiced by the Beatles. But it's not voiced by the Beatles. It's voiced by voice actors pretending to be the Beatles.
I don't know that I ever knew that.
They do appear at the very end. There's a scene where they do All Together Now. And they have like, it's like a video type thing, and they appear on the screen, and there's holes and all that kind of stuff.
Do you feel like that was because, like we were just saying, John Lennon was all the way checked out at this point? It's probably hard to get them all in a room together. It
could be. I don't know the actual reason, but you're probably right.
It's just a theory. I don't know. Could be
we've had Yellow Submarine on one of the other albums, but this has got Only a Northern Song, Hey Bulldog. It's All Too Much, and again, it's got All You Need Is Love on there. The other thing this has, the issue, they came out with like the Yellow Submarine songbook or something, which is just the Beatles songs from the film. The copy I have in front of me here is the actual official soundtrack album. And this has 6 or 7 tracks, which is the orchestral score, which is featured in Yellow Submarine. And that is all orchestrated and composed by George Martin.
Which is always really cool, because there's like I know it's like Pepperland and Sea of Horses and Sea of this and something like that.
Yeah, Sea of Time, Sea of Holes, and March of the Meanies. And
crazy, because I mean, they're in a submarine, water. I see what they did there, Tim.
Exactly. But I mean, I love Yellow Submarine. Yellow Submarine is an absolutely fantastic film.
Was it? No, it was Hard Day's Night that you said you didn't realize that. you were saying something, you and Hannah were watching it and she didn't know a part that you was common.
Oh, yeah.
It's Hey Bulldog.
It's from
song.
Yellow Submarine. It's Hey Bulldog. Yeah. Originally, the US edit of Yellow Submarine, when it came out, and even when it was available on VHS and stuff, it didn't have the Hey Bulldog scene in it. And when they remastered this and initially put it on DVD, and it's now on Blu-ray and 4K, UHD, whatever disc.
All the initials.
All that stuff. They put the Hey Bulldog scene back in. And when Hannah and I was watching it, when it first came out on DVD, she was like, hey, where did this bit come from? Yeah. And I said, it's always been there. And then when I looked into it, it's always been on the UK prints, but it was never put on the US print for some reason.
Yeah, you brought that up when we were doing I had the episode of like your least underrated songs that you did, Hey Bulldog. And I was like, I think that's this. But yeah, I'd never seen it in it. I wouldn't even, I'm sure I could go on the YouTubes now and bring it up, but.
Oh, sure. I mean, I have the remastered, reissued copy of this film and it's in it. But yeah, I bring up the scene. I mean, it's like a player piano thing and the dogs are coming out of it and stuff like that.
I mean, this sounds a lot like the rest of the movie, to be fair.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was like, I think this is it.
Okay, so we're getting into the two final Beatles albums. Now, the way they was released was not the way that they were recorded.
Okay.
Because they started recording Let It Be, the album Let It Be, and then they did the whole rooftop concert and it wasn't working out and Billy Preston gets involved and all this kind of stuff.
And they told everybody to get back.
Yeah, and then they decided that they felt that the Beatles was almost on the end of its life. So they thought, well, we'll make a really great album to go out with. So they made Abbey Road, but they released Abbey Road first.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and Abbey Road was released in September 1969. And I mean, a lot of people say that Sgt. Pepper is the Beatles album that you want to listen to, but I don't know. Abbey Road, especially the side B of Abbey Road, I think as far as a later era definitive Beatles, that's where it's at.
I mean, Sgt. Pepper is good, but I would listen to Abbey Road first.
Yeah, because that medley on the second side is superb, and the bit where it's Lennon, McCartney, and George Harrison trading guitar licks.
Mm-hmm. And it was like, it really does feel almost, even though this one was released first, really does feel like their final to-do to the world. You know what I mean? The way they set it up, the way it's put together, the fact that you have that guitar lick scene, it was like this. Well, they're like, we're the Beatles. This is how we're going to go out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's got to come together on It's Something, which is George Harrison's song, Maxwell's Silver Hammer, because Here Comes the Sun. I mean, this is great stuff.
I swear, Here Comes the Sun. When I was younger, that was probably my all-time favorite Beatles song. Not so much now, but like that has to be on so many movie soundtracks. Like Here Comes the Sun, I swear, is used in like 70% of the movies out there.
It doesn't surprise me. I mean, the songs on this album are so strong.
Yeah. It's a great one.
And anyhow, so we close out the Beatles studio album career with Let It Be, released in May 1970, just 4 years before I came into this earth, or 40 years before Joy was born.
Kind of, yeah.
That kind of idea, you know. But of course, you get the track Let It Be's on here, of course. Two of Us, Dig a Pony, Across the Universe.
Did you ever watch the movie Across the Universe, Tim?
No, I haven't.
I will say I liked the concept, like when I first started watching it, because I love musicals, and obviously I like the Beatles music, and I thought it was a cool concept. But it's kind of boring towards the middle. Like it just got boring, and it kind of tried to divvy into, when we were just talking about like Revolver, when the Beatles really got into this psychedelic world, they tried to enforce that in the movie, and it did like the same arc as almost the Beatles albums. That's what I think they were going for. But at some point it was kind of like, nah, I'm just going to turn it off. I loved at the beginning when he's saying, I just seen a place, and he's talking to the girl. That version is gorgeous. Or I've just seen a face, I don't know when or time and place. And like some of the ways, and then they do Goodbye With the Help of My Friends, which isn't originally the Beatles, but it's a great Beatles song. So it starts out, the first 40 minutes are great, and then it just goes, meh.
Yeah, and then, I mean, I love the Beatles and all, but I don't know if I can watch all of this stuff, you know?
Well, I was thinking if they put it and they made it into the story, because it's about a guy and a girl, you know, and his friends. And I thought, okay, well, if they made it into like a musical, it might work. But yet it just, one, like you're saying, it kind of got boring at some point. And two, I think they got a little too into trying to make it artsy and psychedelic and cool. Like, you know what I mean? They're playing on that whim. And then I was like, meh, I'm done with this.
Oh, well, there you go. As we close this episode out, that's Joy's viewing tip for you.
If you're going to go watch it.
Yeah, don't watch that film.
Or just watch the first 30 minutes. Or just go on the YouTubes and just look up that one guy who sang its version of I Just Seen a Face, because it's really good. But other than that, you're not missing anything.
Dip in, see a little bit, dip straight back out again.
All right. Well, that's all I have. Bye.
Okay, see you later. Bye-bye.